Hey everyone, Juan here. Welcome to SQL Lingua Franca, the podcast about analytics that reveals what the documentation does not cover.
SQL Lingua Franca. Bio.
Today, we have Sarah here. She's the co-founder of Yuno. And we're going to talk much more about the data observability market. We're going to talk about data governance scores, semantic layers, and some of the research that she has conducted interviewing data teams. Sarah, would you like to introduce yourself?
Hi, sure, yeah. So I'm Sarah from Tel Aviv in Israel, the co-founder and CEO of Yuno, a data analytics company. Also a mother of 3 children, actually not so young children. My daughter is already 16 and I have 2 more boys. I live here in the city, travel a lot. I love skiing, I love yoga, and I'm really passionate about data. So
Nice.
I'm very, very happy to be here. So thanks for inviting me.
Sure. Yes, we actually have seen each other in some data conferences in the past. So,
Yes.
hey, for anybody listening, maybe you will see her at one of the upcoming conferences, and especially next year. And Sarah, thank you for the background. Maybe tell me and the audience what is it that you do, and maybe introduce your company as well.
Sure. So, I co-founded Yuno about 2 years ago. It's a data model governance platform, and our mission is really to take in our organizations all the way to AI adoption. And I know it's a big promise and it's a big challenge, but in simple words, if you want to trust your data, if you want analytics to work fast, if you really want to unlock self-serve analytics and make all those LLM-based tools to work, eventually you need to govern your definitions, your business logics, your KPIs, and you need to manage them in a controlled way in a highly variable, always changing business environment. And how to do that is what Yuno is about. So that's our mission, and we're very excited about it. And we've been running for 2 years. We're about 15 people right now, based both in the United States, in California, and in Israel.
That's quite interesting because I think most companies understand the value of like AI adoption or like self-service also as well, going a bit smaller. Most companies kind of know how the end state looks like and what it can bring to them. But I don't think, myself included, I don't think many of us know like what is the path that takes you there. So maybe do you have some ideas like how does the path to AI adoption look like?
So, amazing question. And actually, this really is our mission to take the organization along this journey, every step of this journey. Now, let's think about this together. Why it's so challenging to adopt AI today? If you take, a Gen AI tool, a sort of ChatGPT for your data analytics platform, and you start asking questions. I want to know the amount of revenues in the past month from this and this territories projected by that and that. Create a dashboard for me. Theoretically, it seems like we've got the technology. It should work. But in reality, what happens is that if you train those models on your data model, on your data stack, it's usually not going to give you trusted results, or it will give you a different result every time. And you cannot be sure that it's actually reliable. And the reason is that we have so much mess in our definitions, in our data models, in our business logic. Every large-scale organization usually has a warehouse and some sort of BI tool or tools, and maybe data scientists notebooks. And logic is created all the time. When I say logic, I mean things like definitions in terms like engaged user, active user, total revenues, churn, daily active users, monthly active users, things like that.
Yeah.
They evolve, they change, they emerge all the time. And a large-scale organization has lots of logic. Part of it is buried in BI tools, in notebooks, in workbooks. A lot is duplicated. There are lots of inconsistencies. Some of the things are used, other things were created and never used again. And it's very hard to know what matters, what are the right definitions, what gives the right context to data. And if you want to understand the user intent as it's expressed, in an LLM tool, you need to have the proper, I would say, translation or context to your data. And that's what, this big word semantic layer is all about. And we can elaborate more about that. I guess we'll touch that in more details.
It's a really interesting topic and it's becoming quite hot. But maybe before we even start talking about semantic layers, Sarah, do you have like a textbook definition or like something to make sure that everybody's in the same page when we mention semantic layer?
Yes, it's a good thing to align everyone on because it's used for different things. I think semantic layer is like a sort of it's a layer in concept, but we can think about it as a store where all the definitions of the metrics of the semantic definitions of the organizations are stored with a context, something that is descriptive. This metric is calculated like that. It's the sum of this and this and this divided by that, multiplied by that you have a context for the calculation, that you know which tables, which resources it relies on. That's a standard definition of a metric, usually using YAML files to describe them. So the place where you have the definitions that give context to data, that's the semantic layer. The reason it gets the name layer is because quite often the implementation is a layer that sits between the warehouse and the BI tool. So you have all the definitions there. It's sort of the dictionary of your definitions. And there is an API, an interface to generate a query that uses this definition. And that's the layer implementation. There are other implementations, we can elaborate on that, but this is why it's called a layer. The data application or the BI tool is using the semantic layer to generate the right query using those metrics that are stored there.
And maybe this is already more in the realm of opinions, but what do you think what exactly should go into metric layer? Now, you mentioned, of course, like what is the SQL to get something done? A short description and the source. Those are three that you already mentioned, but I'm wondering, because I do have some ideas, but what else would you add besides those three elements?
So, you're asking from a technical perspective what a semantic layer consists, or, from a business value perspective, what should be added there or what should be included there?
I just think there are plenty of things that you should be documenting regarding your metrics. Sure, semantic layer, I kind of prefer the term metrics, even though like we can use them semi-interchangeably.
Yes.
I think there are quite a lot of things that you should document. And for example, when you look at something like DBT metrics, they do provide a YAML structure that says like these are the things that you should be documenting. But I know that different tools, different people, they believe like, I think most of us agree that source and SQL definition are important. But some people might want to add something here and there. So I'm curious, what is your vision of what we should document in there?
Right. So it makes sense. You want those metrics to be interpreted. You want people to be able to interpret how the calculation is done, to understand exactly. So just a SQL and a source usually is clear for one class of data users, but not to definitely not business users or any natural language tools. So it makes sense to add a title, a description of the calculation and some metadata that gives context to this. And then this comes along the SQL of the metric and the sources that it's based upon. So yes, that's definitely part of it. With with things like DBT and other semantic layers, you would expect to have like the version history, any tests or any other references that help understand how up to date it is, whether it was tested, whether it's of high quality, low quality, things like that. And I would even say that in the context of AI, you would also even want to have things like, is it certified? Is it AI certified? Do I want to plug the AI agent to this, do I want this metric to be part of the models that our LLM is based on?
Yeah, that makes sense. So it sounds to me that besides the very technical things, you would like to add some of the governance, let's say, information in there.
Yeah.
You know,
Yes. And the governance. Yeah. Sorry. Go ahead.
No, that I would argue that the thing that I miss the most out of all of these semantic layers is the business context. Like, I would love to see things like which business people care about this, or why this is used in the business. How does this map to our mission or vision? Maybe even like some perverse incentives, like, hey, be careful because people could exploit this in this way. Or ideally, this number, when it goes up, these ones also have to go up and this one has to go down. I don't have the solution, and I wish I had like more time to think about this and actually work on it. But I really think that we also need to think about semantic layers more in a business, governance, and also technical context.
So I think this is an excellent point, and you're touching something very big here. So, I mean, there is the technical aspect, which is how you code it, how you write it, what's the structure, what fields you need to feed. There is obviously the governance part, right? Is this certified? Is this governed? Is this approved? Is this consistent? Things like that. And, you know, from the business value perspective, the utilization is actually a pretty big indicator, because there might be thousands of metrics in an organization. And, you know, there is a difference between what we consider today as a universal semantic layer and every local semantic layer. So Looker has a semantic layer. Tableau, you could say it has a sort of semantic layer. Hex, Sigma, Mode. Every analytics tool today has its own local semantic layer, this place that holds all the metrics definitions. But, you know, there are lots of them that are created by analysts because they do an ad hoc analysis or an experiment, or they have a new idea, and you have to give them the freedom and independence to do that, because that's how their work is done. But it's never getting traction. It's never really used. So over time, it's just abandoned. But things that are becoming in high usage, this is actually an indication that they have business value. And if you know how much they're used and by which business units, this is a very important piece of information about this metric. So you probably know that it's of high business value. You want to centralize it. You want to govern it. You want everyone to be aligned on it. So utilization is a big part of this journey towards building the right, up-to-date, consistent, universal semantic layer. You want to know what exists, who created new things and where, and then you want to know how often they're utilized. And this gives you the first hint into, do you want to add this to this official semantic layer and start governing it and managing it ethically?
For sure. And now that you're talking about adoption, there is a question that I always have, which is, I think most companies have human semantic layers, which is this person that knows everything from the database implementation to what that like crazy column name means, or what this value that it's assignable. Honestly, most analysts are kind of walking semantic layers. And my question is, it's not a secret that most data catalogs have this issue that people don't like fill them out. Same happens with documentation. And of course, same happens with semantic layer. So maybe the question is, how do you make sure that people actually use the solution instead of like keep the knowledge in their heads?
So it's an excellent question, and they have to get value from this, right? If they don't get value from this, if it's always better for them to spend time creating things from scratch and memorizing things, then no one will collaborate. So it needs to be accessible, and they need to get value from it. I think one of the big challenges that you touch here is really understanding what exists. And I know catalogs, that's where their first initial premise. You will be able to discover things and cut your research time in, like, it will be a fraction of the research time of doing new stuff. But then they're not updated. No one's maintaining them. So they're not up to date. So you cannot trust them. So you're not using them. You go back to square one and you create things from scratch because that's the fastest way. But when you think about it, and I think every data person and every business user had this experience, sitting in a room with product, sales, marketing people in the same room and talking about a very important number, and looking at three different numbers for the same metric, and no one knows what's the correct number. And that's quite embarrassing, right? Because, for example, and that's a personal example, I led a real estate department for a fintech company, and we were not able to report exactly the number of assets that we owned. Now, it was like a real estate business. We purchased houses in the United States. We owned about 300 houses. Think about how much money it is, and then the error ranged between 270 and 320. Like it's almost 20%, right, of a mistake. That's huge. And the reason is that each group, each department, each analyst calculates number of assets for a slightly different purpose in a slightly different way, but they all call it number of assets. Now, when you experience the outcome is, okay, go back, try to understand, try to organize everything, try to map and this takes so much time and energy and effort. And if you went through these processes once, twice, three times, you realize that there is value in managing consistent definitions that everyone's aligned on. And there is value in doing things fast in an experimental way, but you need to be aware that you're doing them fast in an experimental way, and eventually they need to be formalized. So and that's the reality. I think the reason many analysts don't collaborate with those those governance practices is that no one facilitates the creativity, freedom, freestyle part of it. It has to be that and that at the same time. You cannot just expect them to work, to open tickets, to model things, to document things, to govern things. But then, they move to, it's too slow. It's too slow. So every workflow, every governance solution has to embrace the fact that analysts need to get the freedom to creatively try new things. And I think this will encourage them then to formalize them as they get traction.
Okay, so your answer is somewhere like a mix between highlighting the value and also like allowing some flexibility to the people using it.
Yes, yes. And the value is like the indicator for the value is utilization. And if you want to let analysts do those experiments, you do need very powerful visibility tools, observability tools, because you need to be able to see all of that. One of the things I spoke with, I think 300 data teams in the past year. And almost every other data team says, we're not able to govern analysts. We don't know what they're doing. We have zero visibility into all those things that they built in Tableau, in their workbooks, and I'm like, if you had visibility, if you had eyes, and you knew what they created and how often it's used, that's already, part of, like 80% of the governance is there, Now you can use that to decide what you want to formalize and govern and version control and so all that. But yeah, I think a lot of the secret is there.
Which you already mentioned something interesting that I wanted to discuss maybe a bit later, but let's go now. I know you conducted a very extensive research. I think it was last year. And would you like to tell us a bit more about it?
Well, yeah, I interviewed a lot of data leaders about this topic of, what they touched earlier, freedom versus governance. How do you balance the freedom of analytics, self-serve analytics, the democratization of data, with the need to centrally govern your data models, your definitions, your semantics. And it's quite a challenge, and lots of my insights, and also lots of the features that we introduce with Yuno are based on this research, on these interviews. And one interesting point that everyone's now in the process of adopting DBT. Almost, every data team that has a modern data stack is somewhere in the process of migrating the transformations to DBT. Everyone wants data models to sit outside BI tools and in the data layer. And although they're all doing that, they're all somewhat frustrated with that, because it's exactly this balance between freedom and governance that is challenged. If you want to do everything in DBT, then everything needs to go through a central team of engineers. So analysts are experiencing lots of friction and suffering from those bottlenecks. If you decide to give freedom to analysts to do whatever they want, then data teams are frustrated because there is a total chaos with duplicates and silos and inefficient implementations and changes. So, I've spoken with so many teams about this dilemma and this balance challenge.
Maybe, just out of curiosity, what were the most unexpected things that you heard from your research?
Wow. Let's see.
Can imagine.
One unexpected. Yeah, I have one thing that really surprised me. But when maybe today it wouldn't seem like a big surprise, but when DBT introduced, their standard for data transformations, they had analysts in mind because they built everything on top of SQL. And they introduced DBT Cloud with a very intuitive IDE and scheduler. And, the vision was analysts will stop building things in their siloed BI tools, and they will model things in DBT so easily using SQL. And, in many, many, many data teams, they upskilled their analysts to learn DBT and to become sort of analytics engineers or, BI engineers and model things in DBT. And what I've seen is that a lot of the organizations took DBT away from analysts and back to the hands of engineers. And that's quite interesting, right? Because it makes sense to give analysts access. This way things will be modeled as they go. And the reason it's happening is that, in fact, a data analyst, a business analyst, is a pretty important role. And it's not about building and formalizing models. It's about answering business questions using data. And it's a completely different thing. And if you try to turn all your analysts into analytics engineers and data engineers, who is doing that? This requires time, energy, focus. It's the business side of it. And we're seeing it more and more and more. So DBT goes back to engineers. Analysts return to do their real job, which is helping all the business units answering hard business questions using data. And now you need to build workflows that facilitate that. And you now have two populations, engineers, whether it's analytics engineers, data engineers, BI engineers, and analysts. And it's becoming extremely hard to collaborate on the same data stack and data workflows. So that was one interesting outcome, this shift from analysts back to engineers, which really, really, really surprised me. If I think of something else that was unexpected, I'll share. I just need to give it a bit more thought.
Sure. But yeah, that's to comment. That's something I really recognize. I envision that an analyst is super underrated. I get the impression that constantly everybody, like businesses, economies, whatever it is, they see an analyst as an entry-level thing. And then after maybe a couple of years, you're expected to transition to either something more technical, like whatever it is, become a data scientist, a data engineer, or become something else like a manager. Or quite often they treat analysts like a stepping stone. And there is very little companies where people have a really good incentive to become a proper senior analyst. Like I'm talking career progression, also like salary progression, but like dedicate yourself to being super good at answering questions and really going deep into insights. Like become that semantic layer that every company needs. So yeah, I can see
So
that.
it, yeah, and I think using data to answer business question is hard. You can easily convince yourself of almost every theory if you play with the data right. But to actually get to the right insights that can drive the business, you need to have a business-centric approach. You need to really understand why this analysis brings value to the business, whether this is really a valuable analysis, whether it makes sense to invest time here. All these questions, not just being like service providers. Oh, you want that, you want that, you want that, you want that. But really thinking about the problem here, the dilemma here, the business question that we're looking at. That's something that differentiates, a good analyst from, an entry-level analyst. And you know what? I've also met few analysts that are also, very, very professional and good. And it's said that the natural way to move up is to become more technical or become an engineer. But I think that the business aspect or the understanding of data for business purposes, this really is what being an analyst is about. And it's not about coding data models. This really is, a different profession that can be kept for engineers. That's fine.
Yeah. So maybe for anybody
Yeah.
listening here, let's like think about that. Think about like what is the incentive for an analyst in my organization to become like really good and stick to that role for longer. Because when you let that
Yeah.
happen, some very interesting things pop up, like you just mentioned.
Yeah. Yeah. And you invest so much money in the data stack, in data processes, in data teams, all to get, business insights. That's the whole purpose. So if you can invest a bit more thought in how your analysts can actually optimize that part to get to the right business insights, to get to do like a deep, high quality analysis that is actually tailored around a good business question. I think this alone can help a lot of the problems around data. You're investing in quality, governance, pipelining, ingestion, computing, warehouses, all of that. But this last piece is often neglected. So definitely, yes, this needs a lot of attention, and you need good, high-skilled people there for sure.
Indeed, the last mile is sometimes a bit difficult.
Yeah. Yes. Oh, but I have another thing that comes to mind.
Oh,
I
interesting.
started interviewing data teams, 2 years ago. And, with time, the challenges and the themes change. So 2 years ago, everyone was talking about access to data. Give us access to data. We want access for everyone. Democratization, democratization, democratization. And in the past few months, I identify a real shift from democratization to centralization and governance. Like everyone's talking about governance now, and it's surprising, right? Semantic layers have been there for the past 5 years or so. Everyone knows that governance is important for years, but in the recent year, there is a huge shift towards governance. Everyone's talking about this, and it kind of goes back to the front stage. And I was wondering why. What's changing? So I think one thing is when you gave so much access to everyone, you created such a chaos that everyone realizes, well, you cannot really manage that. You have to govern and centralize if you want to resume trust in your data results. So that's one thing. But I think really the second thing is AI. If you want to accelerate things using AI, you have to embrace governance practices. You have to put them in place. And if you don't do this now, in 6 months, in 12 months, when you will want to plug your AI agent to your system, it will just not work. So better lay the grounds, on time.
For sure. I have a theory, and that is I cannot pinpoint, but I'm willing to say it was 2019, where an insane amount of governance related companies started popping up. Well, most of them, they were data observability tools. And I remember
Yeah.
you would go to any conference around that time, like right before COVID, and every single company was like something observability, and a lot of people, including myself, is like, what exactly is observability? Like, what exactly is a data catalog? This, that. How is it different from?
Yeah.
I think all of that wave of people started like telling the market like, hey, this is a space, there is some interesting things here, this is necessary. And it has taken a while, but I've noticed that thanks to all of that huge shift, at least from the market side, a lot of organizations are catching up like, yeah, this is something that we need. And now that we're a bit drier
Yeah.
on resources, on people, on a lot of, there are more constraints on organizations. They already started mapping out some things like cost reduction, that's governance, security, privacy, things like
Yeah.
PII not getting in trouble if we use AI. They're mapping a lot of these things into governance. So I think those two big things have happened in the last years. One of them maybe 5 years ago, and the other one since whatever we have heard of the layoffs and the most of the teams wanted to shrink down.
Yes, yes. Well, it's been a hard year globally, so yes, it happens at the same time. But I think, I mean, ahead of us there's a lot of there's a big promise for data with AI capabilities, and yes, this definitely shifts a lot of focus to preparing a good infrastructure for that. I mean, building the right foundation. And yes, it relates to access and privacy and security, but at the same time to governance, to version control, to consistency aspects and things like that. And a lot of focus is shifted there. And this is why you see all those like semantic layer companies going back to the front stage, and DBT talking so much about observability and governance and the analytics development life cycles and all of that. Like this is like the existing conversation in the data space.
Yeah. If anything, talking about that conversation, I really don't like the term data observability, just because I think it's become such a large umbrella. It covers everything from cost reduction, semantic layers, to data catalogs, and many more use case data quality that I'm not even thinking at the moment. And so what I noticed that happens into a lot of companies is that they think, oh, we need a data observability tool. And they have budget for just one. But in reality, it's like, no, it's like 6, 10, 15 tasks that need to happen. Maybe some are not such a
Yes.
big priority, but like putting everything into a single bubble has made things. I think bundling so many things onto data observability has been, this is just speculation from me, good for catalogs. But I think some other things like data quality and metric stores or semantic layers has gotten a little bit of the short end there.
So it's actually a very good point. I mean, and while observability, like the category, is really about the quality of the data that that flows in the pipeline. So originally, like companies like Monte Carlo, Great Expectations, Big Eye, those are the observability companies. They really are about catching data issues, data problems on time and alerting where exactly in the pipeline the problem probably occurred. So they're looking at the data. And I think what's confusing is that catalogs, I mean, originally they were built for business users to
Yeah.
find the right table, the right report, but then they became like metadata stores that give observability into the lineage and into the tables, the data models, everything that exists. And now there is a lot of overlap. So there are the traditional things that are part of governance: access, PII, auditing, compliance, all of that. Let's put them aside. If you think about, about the real essence of governance in the sense of, I would say, semantic governance, or, if you really want to manage your business logic and understand what are the right definitions and manage it, an up-to-date and consistent semantic layer, that's a different angle of observability. And if I go back to the first question that you asked me, actually the journey looks like you want to observe every definition that is created wherever it's created, because things can be created in notebooks, in BI tools, in SQL tools, in data scientists, notebooks, whatever. You want to understand utilization, as I said before, and then you want to use that to build a semantic layer, and you want to know what's in the semantic layer, what's not in the semantic layer, or what's in the universal semantic layer, and what's in the local semantic layers that are still, in an experimental phase. And you want to be able to manage all of that centrally, because this really is the management of the foundation of your business logic and of your AI. And this would also probably get the name an observability platform. So, yeah, I totally agree with you that there needs to be, we should gather some copywriters, put them in a room, and help create, more fragmented names to things, because it's really confusing. Like when you say governance or you say observability, it can mean so many different things.
Yeah.
And I see it takes me like 5 minutes to explain to a customer when I say observability or when I say governance, what do I mean? What exactly am I referring to? But there are no other words right now.
Which is actually very interesting, because you're a co-founder of a company that, I don't know if you openly call it a data observability tool, but I'm sure people put you in that category even if you don't want to. What is it like to be working or being a founder in one of these companies and trying to stand out? Because I believe that what Yuno does is very different than most traditional observability tools. How do you get out of that corner and show people?
Wow, it's an amazing question about, the journey of a founder, I think. We came up with this. Yuno is really about balancing this freedom and governance approaches and helping an organization build, manage, and constantly evolve a governed semantic layer or a governed data model. And we're introducing a lot of automations and advanced technology to map everything, to understand utilization, and to automatically add things to the semantic layer. But at the same time, we're facilitating a workflow to manage this. And we did all that, and we started by calling it dynamic data modeling, right? That's what it is. Business logic is dynamic, in exchange, let's call it dynamic data modeling. That's the process, semantic layer is dynamic, everything's dynamic. But no one knows what dynamic data modeling is, and we're a startup. And if we write dynamic data modeling, who will get it? So now
it sounds like a marketing
data model
promise.
Governance platform.
Okay.
Yes. And then, we call it data model governance. And the first feature is end-to-end observability. And the second feature is utilization, and then shift left and so on. So you're touching a very important point. When you're a startup, you need to work hard from a messaging perspective to stand out. And now I realize that the way to do that is to say exactly what you're doing and others don't do, like being as accurate as you can, and not use the same buzzwords that could be on a website of every other data company. And I'm now working hard these days to do exactly that. So we're giving utilization and lineage visibility from the data layer to the BI layer. That's what we're doing. We're not doing observability. Observability is too general. The more you can be specific, the more people also will understand, okay, that's what I'm getting. That's what I'm not getting. And when you write those general things, it looks like all companies do the same thing.
Yeah. And it's also crazy because you have to balance at least 3 personas. Maybe there are more or less that I'm not thinking. But you need to write something that is compelling to, me, which is like the technical person using these tools. So I care about like the way that it's used, the APIs. Does this integrate with the tools that I work for?
Yeah.
Like, do you have something VS Code? But then there is the head of governance who cares more about legal compliance. Like, is this SOX? Is this, can I host it on my own environment, whatever it is? And then there is like the business person that is like, oh, this sounds cool. We should do it. Here is some budget. Maybe this is going to help me achieve my goals. And it's so hard to write something that is compelling for those three people. And then let alone...
For sure.
Sometimes there are like...
I mean, you're managing three conversations at the same time, all the time. I agree, it's hard. You need to think about what interests each of those personas. So what's the pain of each of those personas? What's the pain of the business user? They want things to be delivered fast. They don't want to hear, well, the report will be ready just in a month. They want to get it now, and they want to get the results that they can trust. If it's using AI, perfect. That's even better. But even not with AI, they want to ask a question and get the report tomorrow. That's what bothers business users. And like governance people, they worry about things like PAI and access and compliance, but also, that things will be consistent. They are responsible for this trust thing, that you can actually trust the data. And then, the technical people, they want to know it works. They want to know it integrates easily. They want to know that the lift and the onboarding is not too complex. They want to think that it's cool. That it's actually implemented in a cool way. They want to love it because they're going to use it. It needs to be a cool UI for them. They really need to enjoy the tool. Like the two first personas, they might not see the tool. So yes, you're having like three different conversations all the time. And I'm doing a lot of LinkedIn posting and a lot of thought leadership writing, and just to access my audience. So sometimes I'm targeting decision makers, sometimes I'm targeting the more technical people that work with the tool. But you really need to manage three different conversations all the time.
Yeah. Also, it's hard to be that person that is like putting content and that all of the personas are equally receptive to you. Because I know some companies that have like, for example, like founders that like every techie loves, but that I also know would get destroyed by a room of C-level people. And the opposite is also true.
Yeah.
It's hard to be like that founder that has that versatility to appeal to all of these personas.
Right. Yeah. And there's a fourth audience, which is, the investors. They also need to be excited about what you're doing and understand and see the vision. So you manage all these conversations all the time. It's quite a challenge. If you ask me, I think it's there's always the challenge of identifying a real problem and building a good product and executing and so on. But managing the messaging is one of the hardest, I think, journeys of every startup founder.
Of course. And to be honest, that's also a problem that we see at a micro scale if you do any type of data job. This applies to telling to your colleagues, to your organization, to your manager, to C-level, what exactly do you do, why it matters. Oh, God, I don't even know if my wife and my family have any clue of what I do, and I just made it more confusing because all of a sudden I was an analytics engineer, and there you go, one new thing that we need to define. So yes,
now we have another new role to explain. Yeah,
communicating data at a large and a small scale, it's quite tricky. It's I think a problem for a lot of us. Maybe on the same train of thought of like startup, and because you have interviewed so many people and you're like in a lot of people's fields of vision, is Sarah, what do you think? Where do you think the market is going?
Wow, big question. So, definitely everyone's talking about AI. And, we couldn't, 2 years ago, we couldn't imagine that we would access ChatGPT every day to write almost every email, every piece of content, every piece of code. Like, no one's coding without any, Copilot help that really accelerates everything. This is part of our day-to-day practices, it's obviously going to be the same for business users. It doesn't matter if it's a finance department, HR department, sales, marketing, product. Everyone will use AI as part of their, Gen AI tools as part of their practices. So I think everything's going towards making this work and being trustworthy, reliable, and secure. Like, you don't want to risk anything if you start using that. So if you ask me, and this is why we see such a big trend towards governance, but governance is just a word. The teams and the companies that will be able to actually, build a proper foundation, understand the journeys, build the right roles in place to facilitate that will succeed. But if you ask me, that's where everything's going.
Interesting. Because to me, AI already feels a little bit like the past. Do you think we're going to continue much longer, or we're kind of at the brink of something relatively new happening?
Well, I mean, there's still a lot to leverage. It's the past in the way that the technology is not new. The technology is there. We're able to, create those models and have them do some pretty amazing things. That's not a new thing. I think we will keep seeing more and more applications of AI that are becoming as human as possible for us. We will have conversations about data. We will not be coding data or writing SQL about data. We will just have conversations with our data. And that's really the shift that we're not seeing yet. We're not yet talking to our organization data stack.
To me, like, thanks to AI and everything from Copilot to ChatGPT, I'm rethinking a lot of my job. There were a lot of things that I used to think were real work that I'm now realizing how trivial they are. Just to give an example, I think before the pandemic, I would have written a script that says, hey, check this list and tell me all of the things in this list that are also in this other list. Like, for example, when you wanted to check if two tables were very similar or not. Things like breaking your brain when you have like a nested JSON that you got from an API to how exactly do I query this particular key. All of that in reality, and I know this now thanks to AI, it's very trivial work. So at least for me, it's opening the question of like, once all of this trivial stuff that can be easily done by large language models is out of my plate, where am I going to focus and what is like really, really valuable? And
so I think that's an excellent question. And a lot of what Yuno is doing is leveraging these kind of technologies to automate a lot of the work. So, I mean, we're contributing to that. But in the end, I think it goes to the two edges. One, which we touched before, is what it means to work with data to ask business questions. And that's where, I mean, asking the right questions. If you think about ChatGPT, right, the magic is about asking the right questions. It's not about providing the technical answer. It's really about what's the correct business question to be asked here. And I think it will bring, I mean, maybe AI will bring the traditional analyst role back to what it was in the first place, things that human beings can do and machines can just assist in doing. So that's one thing. They will spend less time doing technical work and they will actually do deep analysis, thinking, insight, driving insights kind of work. And the other end is, proper engineering. So you wouldn't want engineers to just spend time creating tables and then duplicating them in the BI tools and then creating interfaces and then creating another thing 100 times. I mean, you would want them to think about efficiency, about cost, about optimization, about how to structure things right in a scalable way. It's like the difference between coding or, a software language and software engineering. So I think in the engineering side, things will be shifted more to architecting the things properly, to building things for scale, to making smart engineering decisions, and on the analytics side, to making smart business decisions. And between those things, AI will just help bridge all the gaps and automate a lot.
For sure. Maybe another question is for every analyst listening to this podcast right now, Sarah, what would be your recommendation for do this if you want to get business value out of your data?
I mean, from an analyst perspective,
Yeah.
really try to understand what's the business problem at stake. What's bothering the business user? What's on their plate? What decisions they're trying to make? Why are they asking those questions? And help them ask the correct questions that are good data related questions. Not every question can be answered using data or is a good data related question. I think the more analysts will focus on that, the more value they will bring to the organization.
And now the other side of the table, which is you mentioned that sometimes engineers see their analyst in a maybe an antagonistic way. How do you give them that freedom that you mentioned, and how do you foster collaboration with them?
So, to answer that, I will have to speak a little bit about Yuno and the platform that we've built. But from a data, even a central data team or platform team perspective, and I'm using Tableau just as an example. It's the same for Power BI, Looker, whatever BI platform they're using. They just have create a wild west of definitions, joins, tables, charts, dashboards, like a total chaos that they create with their bare hands. And data engineers, the natural bias would be, we don't certify that. We are not signing on that. That's not what the infrastructure we've built fact tables for them that they need to query. If they query the fact tables, we can sign on what they're reporting. Anything else, we cannot take responsibility for analysts. We are not able to govern them. They're not following our policies. That's usually kind of frustration, right? And they usually sit even in different geographies. So for them to just even have a conversation about a data model is there's a lot of friction involved. So what Yuno does here is it tells engineers, listen, first you need eyes. We give you eyes into what they're doing. And eyes mean what they create and who is using that and how much. And we give you that, out of the box automatically. That's the technologies that we've built. Now you can see, well, I've built hundreds of models in dbt, and I can see that my analysts are actually managing thousands of dashboards. 90% are in zero usage in the past 60 days. Well, let's start cleaning them and deleting them, or at least let's stop the refresh jobs that feed them, because we're just wasting money there. So that's one outcome. The other is you can see, well, these are highly used dashboards, but they're not governed. What does it mean? They're not connected to dbt, so they sit on a custom SQL that joins 3 dbt tables with other raw tables and a CSV file. Okay, now as a data engineer, I can prioritize my effort. I see, well, that's the most used dashboard of the organization. That's something I want to model, I want to govern, I want to add this to dbt. So it helps you prioritize your workflows and your tasks and your focus. You now know what matters. So you can let your analysts create everything. You now control what's happening there. You can have automated workflows to clean up things that don't get traction within 60 days, 120 days, so that your environment remains clean and efficient. And you will focus your engineering effort only on things that have a real business value, not on just any request that analyst gives you. I think that's really where this collaboration is suddenly, empowered, and they're not enemies anymore. Every person doing their job in their environment using their preferred tools, and now they work together. And the semantic layer is kind of the intersection between them. So obviously, the people who create metrics are business analysts. It's a business creation. It's not an engineer that comes up and say, oh, I think we need to calculate churn in a different way. It's a business thing. So things can be created by the business and then formalized, codified, added to semantic layer in the beginning by engineers and then by automated workflows using LLM and things like that by analysts.
It's funny. I remember a long time ago, I had a client, and my whole job was to see the most queried dashboards, refactor them, and look at all of the data sources that were created, check all of the calculations, and try to make the best out of all of the worlds. I also had to check all sorts of data sources if they were coming from the official, if there were some issues with the joins. And that was a full-time job because we're talking about 2018, 17 maybe.
Yeah.
Back then, there was a lot of
So
manual
now
work.
you get it. So you get it out of the box with Yuno.
Yeah.
Once you install it, and it's a 30 minutes call to just connect, get the right permissions. An hour later, you have all of that you just described in one click, in one simple search. And you know what? We came up with this new concept. We call it governance score. And you can define, properties like is governed. Like you can say which percentage of your queries are governed
Interesting.
per business domain, per, department. And then, sometimes you have 10,000 queries every day, but 8,000 are governed. So that's fine. 2,000 are, but if 80% of your queries are not governed, this gives a real score to the value that the data team brings, right? So we're now working with teams to give these governance scores. And this is exactly what you said. If your dashboard is not connected to dbt, but actually involving some other tables, then it's not governed.
Yeah.
No one knows what's going on there.
Huh. I've never thought of grading people on governance, but it makes a lot of sense. Can you tell me maybe some of the things that affect this score?
Yeah, so it's highly flexible. So one example is governed, and it can be associated with a data source, with a dashboard, with a calculated field. Is it only querying dbt tables? It can be, is this using dbt metrics or semantic layer governed metrics? It can be things like, is this connected to models in a specific layer? Like, I don't want govern things to query things in the bronze layer, in the silver layer, just gold layer. So you can do it by layer. Is this based in the upstream path on a custom SQL that contains logic? If there is a custom SQL that contains logic, it's not governed because this is logic that some analyst created in a PPT or in a data source. So it's highly flexible like that. And I'm working with various customers, each define governed in a slightly different way. And we give this flexibility, but then they have one number they can work with and they can, put a real KPI for all those data model governance efforts. I want to elevate my governance score.
Wow, that's a really interesting idea, though. I will think about it, some of the things that I would like to see in a governance score, and maybe we can continue this chat. But Sarah, we are almost...
definitely. I'd love to show you. Yeah.
Oh, that's great. We're almost at the end of our time. I think you have been really, really good at not pushing too much your tool, your solution, and marketing. But maybe to wrap it up, could you tell us who are your ideal clients? Who should get in touch with you from the people listening? And what exactly would be something that you would like to discuss with them?
Sure. Yes, thanks for the opportunity. So we're targeting large-scale organizations. I mean, by large scale, I mean above 800, 1,000 employees, or in the data numbers, more than 20, 30 data practitioners. I mean, beneath that, those problems that I mentioned and we discussed here exist, but they're less urgent and they're manifested in a less severe way. As organization scales, we're targeting organization that adopted DBT. We currently operate, on top of the foundation of DBT. So adopted DBT for the data transformations, are interested, they have the intent to govern their metrics. They don't know yet how, okay. They haven't started using DBT metrics, okay. They don't have to be using DBT Cloud. They don't have to be, they can just be users of DBT Core. And currently, on the BI side, we support Looker and Tableau, and coming next quarter is also Sigma and Power BI. So
Ooh,
any large
interesting.
organization that uses, we're warehouse agnostic. It can be Snowflake, Databricks, Redshift, BigQuery, doesn't matter. DBT, Core, Cloud, perfect, but can be just Core. Tableau, Server, Cloud, Looker, LookML, Power BI, Sigma. That's our target audience. We're usually talking to the head of data platform. They're usually the decision makers about, they know how to get the buy-in for that. Then we run POCs of about 3 weeks where we install this for free, no commitment. But usually, our experience after 3 weeks, no one wants to let it go. Like now that I have this visibility, this access, this utilization scores, and I can manage everything centrally, I don't want to let it go. So I hope this answers your question.
For
And
sure.
the 3 things that we give is like this from Snowflake and DBT all the way to Looker and Tableau, lineage and utilization breakdown, like everything, every piece of logic, every definition, every dashboard, and how they are connected to DBT, to other tables, and what's used by whom. The second thing is the ability to shift left measures from Tableau and add them to DBT and make DBT work with Tableau and Looker. Although, we're not relying on the existing integration. And the third thing is these governance scores. So we're creating governance dashboards for customers,
Interesting.
helping them build their own governance properties and track. And this really helps them, prioritize the next steps that will ensure an up-to-date, a consistent, a governed data model.
That sounds amazing. So everybody, if you felt that Sarah was speaking to you, get in touch with her, with Yuno, get a demo. It's a very interesting tool. And trust me, I've been the person doing this manually. I don't do it anymore. But if it was 2017, I would have loved to have a tool like this to govern all of the metrics and the dashboards that I had.
Thank you.
Thank you so much, Sarah. It's been a really fun conversation.